The Building Brands Marketing Podcast is dedicated to exploring the journeys of industry leaders who have successfully built a brand. Join me, Robert Royer, president of Building Brands Marketing, and an entrepreneur who's successfully scaled multiple brands as we dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and insights that have shaped the success of industry leaders and provide you with the resources you need to do the same. Building Brands Marketing is a full-service marketing agency specializing in crafting customized marketing strategies for service-based businesses with a creative powerhouse to drive real results. Welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. Welcome to the Legal Leaders series of the Building Brands Podcast. Today we have a special guest, Chris Johnsen, owner and attorney with Johnsen Law, Fidelity National Title, Lake Conroe in Houston, and Texas Estate and Probate Lawyers, the serial entrepreneur. Hey, Chris, welcome.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me on.
Doing fantastic. I'm excited to speak with you because you've been on all sides of the spectrum of law practice, business, marketing. You've kind of been in all areas. So you started as a business owner before becoming a lawyer. And that really gives you a unique perspective on business law. So I wanted to dive into that. Let's start out. How has your business background shaped your approach to legal services and differentiating your brand as a firm?
So, and just to back up one step. So I really think real estate's first, business is second, and then law is third. And all three of those involve some component of business. Now, the real estate and the business, but the real estate, I started using attorneys. I started spending money on attorneys. I saw their value, but I also saw their annoyance. And there were things that I just didn't like. Like, for instance, I always felt like they were billing by the second and you know, exchanging pleasantries and things like that I would always see on the bill. Like, they would just like call and say happy birthday or whatever, and I'd see it on the bill. Like, that's just how I felt. So when I became a lawyer, I never wanted clients to feel nickel and dimed all the time. I didn't want them to feel like there wasn't some kind of relationship, that the relationship was just fake and it was all about putting something on a bill. So that was one way that being in business framed how the type of lawyer that I am.
That makes a lot of sense. So, you know, a lot of service-based entities struggle with that transition from a personal brand to a fully scalable business. And I know you yourself were really grassroots involved at the introductory stages of your businesses, but that's scaled to a pretty robust team over time. So how have you navigated that challenge of selling clients on your team and your team's experience rather than just yourself?
You know, I have to, first of all, with clients, it's about being honest and managing the relationship. And then there's also ways to let the client know that even if they don't talk to you on a daily basis, that you're still the one on their matter. So one way that I let people know, well, one way I'm honest is by letting them know that I'm not always the best attorney for their matter or for a specific assignment on their matter, that I may need to bring in someone on my team to do a different task. Like, I'm not a securities attorney. I would need to pull in a securities attorney to work on that part of the project. And I would be totally upfront with my client. I wouldn't even pretend like I would be the best person for that task. And then, you know, there are times that I need to have other attorneys involved, and they might be very heavily involved in the matter, but I can still touch base with my client. I could still shoot a text. I could still do things to let them know that I know what's going on, and I can remind them and reinforce them that I am actively involved in their matter and that I know everything and I'm involved in the strategy. Because at the end of the day, having me involved in the strategy is like one of the more important things. So the client feels okay with that. And then as far as managing the relationship, and it doesn't come down to this very often. But sometimes I have to have these words every couple years. It's the, you're not my only client talk. And, I don't think you wouldn't be able to hire me for what you're paying if you were my only client. And I don't like having that discussion. It comes off adversarial, but sometimes relationships, it's about, not everything's a nice discussion, right? Sometimes boundaries need to be set and discussions aren't as comfortable, but and I've had those discussions. I don't think I've ever gotten fired from one. I think clients at the end of the day understand, like, yeah, he's right. It's unreasonable for me to expect that he only has one client. And of course he needs to work with people on his team to service all his clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I kind of want to segue for a second. This is a hot topic to most of the listeners, probably, that are listening to this podcast. And it really is about the non compete ruling. There's been some changes in the non compete area over the past year or so. The legal landscape has changed. And so I wanted to ask you to break down some of the key implications for business owners of any adjustments they should make due to current, the latest rulings as it relates to non-competes over the past year.
So in the last year, there was the FTC non-compete rule, which enforcement is temporarily stayed. There's an injunction out there. It could get completely gutted by the Trump administration. It might go into effect. I don't know. It's important to know that it's out there. It's important to know that non-competes are under attack and that this may be the time to um, reevaluate your non-competes. I think before the rule goes into effect, I mean, even more so, it could happen a couple years from now. A lot of the fallout, it would be to tighten up the language, but then also soften the language. I'd say the last 5 years, non-competes have been generally under attack across the country by courts. Not as much by administrative agencies like the FTC, not as much other angles, but from the courts themselves. I think there's just been a unpopular public opinion as far as non-competes. I think judges have felt like they've gone too far and that they put people out of work. And so I would say I'm seeing courts not enforce non-competes a fair amount. There's different ways. Non-compete almost has a dirty word, and there are ways to have competitive restrictions without calling it a non-compete. And some versions of that are non-solicit as the customers. That's a very narrow type of non-compete, or confidentiality agreement. So someone that understands the nuances of all that can go in to employment agreements and other agreements in the context of the relationship and draft around a lot of those things, so it doesn't seem super competitive. But yeah, that's the non-compete landscape. If I were an employer, I'd know that I should go in and evaluate them, soften them up, make sure that they seem fair. And then if I were an employee, I should know that I have a pretty good chance of fighting them sometimes. I mean, if you have the money to fight it, that's kind of the caveat too. Non-compete litigation is really expensive, and kind of he who has the gold rules typically.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point that I know several business owners that I've worked with have discussed, and it's that perhaps the number one thing that generally with non-competes most of the business owners I talk with are concerned about is the solicitation of clients or customers.
Right.
Hey, if an employee was to leave, can they come back and steal the customers?
Yeah.
Not necessarily the employee leaving to be working in the same industry.
Yeah.
And so does it make more sense at some points possibly to just have a non-solicitation agreement in place
Yeah.
as opposed to a non-compete? Is that what you're seeing happen more often or be kind of the trend in the marketplace?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you accurately summarized it. I've personally done away with non-competes, and then I've very specifically carved out other types of restrictive covenants to
Mm-hmm.
protect my customer relationships, because like you said, at the end of the day, that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know for myself, operating service-based businesses, a big part of it for me as well has been my talent retention because
Hmm.
especially at the beginning days of our agency, a lot of the talent was cultivated by me personally. Having to train and develop these skill sets. Some of them are either current or very recent graduates of college. They're getting their first experience here. And I wanted to protect not just them from going in direct competition, after we train those resources, but someone in a more senior level potentially leaving and then trying to take that workforce with them. And
Hmm.
so I see that also the non-solicitation of employees being really critical with service-based business, almost equally as critical as the client or customer-based non-solicitations.
Jeez. Uh-huh.
With yeah, are you seeing a lot of that language being incorporated into agreements as well for service-based businesses?
That's always been there. The non-solicitation of employees. Let me just tell you a real life story. I saw a whole office shut down, and I was on the plaintiff side of that case.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they didn't have a non-solicited to employees. Um, we had to make other arguments that weren't as good than if we had that provision. But we did make other arguments. But if someone it's not uncommon for someone in a supervisory position that runs a branch office or is in an office, when they leave to go to a competitor, they just gut your whole office. It can be
Mm-hmm.
disastrous. It can be way worse than the customers being solicited. So yeah, a non-solicited employees and a non-solicited customers, both of those together are really important to have.
Yeah, it seems like those are the most critical pieces. I'm looking at the space, and non competes just don't seem to have the same weight, and potentially
Yeah.
can be even counterintuitive rather than having some of these more, as you said, softer, uh, uh,
Yeah.
contractual obligations in there. So anyway, that's good information, Chris. Really appreciate it. But I want to take another turn here. One of the things that impresses me about you is your business acumen, your business background. You've really built these three different but semi-connected brands that you're working within. So tell me, how do you make unique brand identities for each of the three brands, even though there's some crossover in the space that you're working within?
Hmm. Okay, so I've always been really big on brands. I've always thought really hard what makes me, my business, different from competitors. And I've always paid attention when businesses have tried to articulate why they're different than a competitor, and most of the time I think it's kind of BS. It all sounds like the same, and why? Because it's really hard to articulate a real competitive advantage. Um, because saying I'm a good lawyer, well, darn, you better all be good lawyers, right? That's kind of like the starting point. That's the base level.
Sure.
So I really, really think about that. I want something that's honest, unique, that's sexy, that's kind of innovative and cutting edge. I don't want to, and I guess that's all a reflection of me personally and kind of my values and who I am. But I'm thinking about it for the business, and I'm designing it. And I'm also designing it around who's my ideal customer. So I need to come up with
Mm-hmm.
my ideal customer profile. I need to come up with my unique selling proposition, and I need to marry the two, and then I need to through that come up with the brands. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not selling myself anything. I'm selling my customers something, and I need to think about what that is, and how I can offer it. and I want that business, I want that brand to be an extension of myself. And there's some differing opinions here. I think especially in modern social media marketing, there
Mm-hmm.
is an argument that becoming a Grant Cardone is the best way to scale a Grant Cardone business, right? He's done it. So is Tony Robbins. These people scaled through their personal brand. I'm kind of the old traditional approach. Like, I want to build a business brand that's different and unique from me.
Yeah. And who's to say that both ways don't work? I don't believe that it's a one size fits
No.
all thing.
Mm-mm.
I think one of the observations I've made with your various brands is you've done a good job of honing in on the messaging, the key benefits, and really positioning that value prop appropriately across the brands. Client centric approach. That's what every lawyer says they have, right? Like
Yeah.
every single lawyer basically says, hey,
No.
clients, it's the same thing with doctors, patient centric approach. It's the most overused feature that people,
Yeah.
they think it's a benefit sometimes, I think, when they say
Yeah.
it, but it's really a feature. And what does that really mean for the end user? I think it's so critical. And I talk about this all the time. Defining the messaging is more critical than any placement of the messaging of where it is. And I think that's one thing you've done done well. Hats off to you, Chris, there.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is a not always the questions we ask on this podcast, but I want to flip the seat a little bit and ask about your podcast. I know you're the host of a
Okay.
podcast, In-House
Okay.
Counsel Insights, and that's really been a good part of your branding strategy for
Yeah.
all the firms. So tell us, the listeners, myself, how has a podcast helped you build and nurture relationships and generate new business, if any at all?
Right. So again, like putting all this in context, you have to ask, why did I start In-House Counsel Insights? And it would be the same thing like when I considered writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked myself why, and then does it really accomplish what I'm intending to accomplish? My girls like to tell me all the time to do like stupid lawyer videos, and I'm like, well, that's great, but it's not really my audience, so it's not really going to get me clients. Like doing videos for 8-year-old girls isn't really going to get me clients and more business. So I need to ask why. And so I did not do In-House Counsel Insights to get like massive exposure, to become like famous and have tons of organic views. I'm not selling anything from that. So I'm not monetizing it that way. I'm monetizing it through relationships. And so I thought about who's my ideal customer, and I've known for a while that my ideal customer typically involves an in-house attorney. The business has gotten big enough where they can hire an attorney as an employee to manage their legal spend and do some legal work in-house. Now,
Sure.
making relationships with those attorneys is somewhat hard, because I guess part of the allure of going in house is you don't have to be out and about drumming up business anymore. You
Yeah.
have one client, it's the company. You get to go home, go to eat dinner with your kids, and that's it. You go to work, and so they tend to just kind of disappear, and they're not really celebrated. Shit, lawyers aren't really celebrated, at least especially business attorneys. Maybe some criminal stuff. There's like a sexy part of that, but in what we do, it's just boring, right?
Yeah.
So, um, how do how can I give them a gift? How can I meet those people, and how can I give them a gift by making them famous, giving them the spotlight, putting them out there? And so I came up with the idea of In-House Counsel Insights, and I've met some amazing in-house attorneys that I wouldn't have met otherwise through having that show. And so that's my strategy in having the podcast, and it's a pretty common strategy to do something like that.
Yeah. Have you learned anything on the podcast from some of the guests that you bring
Tons.
on Yeah.
100,
So
yeah, tons.
there's like a whole iron sharpens iron mentality to that
Yeah.
as well. Like, and this is kind of the additional benefits that some people sometimes maybe neglect when it comes to marketing. is something like that you created, really, if I'm hearing you correctly, as a relationship nurturing component initially, was the
Mm-hmm.
primary kind of underlying
Mm-hmm.
benefit of it. Was But at the same time, you're learning more from the guests that you bring on. You're
Mm-hmm.
continuing to develop your craft, your skill set, nurturing those relationships, and then maybe also knowing that you are, at least in some businesses that are B2B oriented, you possibly are providing value driving content and additional
Mm-hmm.
information of value to your existing client base.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a multi purpose. It's not a, hey, just this one objective is the purpose of it.
Totally
And
agree.
that's usually the way those things go, and so it's not, I ask a very black and white question, but it's not a black and white answer. So hats
Mm-hmm.
off to you. I mean, I know obviously it's a lot of work to put those things together, and service-based entrepreneurs, one thing you do not have is time. So hats off to you for pulling that off.
You got to create systems, right? I'm a big believer in kind of like you figure it out yourself or delegate to someone to figure out. Although I think it's best you can still do it yourself first. And then, I have a VA in the background that's just constantly reaching out to people, setting up appointments.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Understanding how to do it yourself first is critical, and then you can more effectively delegate in those scenarios. So,
Yeah.
Chris, you've been an extremely successful entrepreneur, attorney, everything. So, what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs who are looking to build a strong and lasting brand in today's competitive market?
Advice to build a strong competitive brand. Okay. Um, I think you need to understand marketing. I think everyone needs to understand marketing more so than ever. That doesn't mean you do your own marketing, but it does mean you understand your own marketing, the difference between sales and business development, the difference in your market area and who you're actually targeting, your ideal customer profile, your unique selling proposition, all these things that someone can educate themselves on. If you were going to start your own business, I would start reading these books 2 years in advance of starting your own business. To me, it's more important than the operational focus books, um, because when it comes time for you to hire a marketing person to work with, you can understand what they're telling you and how to tackle getting business most effectively for your business, because all my businesses are completely different. I've got some that are like more sales focused that I do
Mm-hmm.
zero marketing in, and then I've got one that all I do is marketing and it's zero sales. And then I've got one that is kind of not marketing in the traditional marketing sense, but there are marketing components, almost like guerrilla tactics of getting out there in front of people. So the approach is completely different depending on what you're going after. I like to think about it like fishing, and I've always been a fisherman, so to me it just makes sense, right? You learn about your lures, you learn about your knots, you learn about your equipment, you learn where to go, and then you come up with a strategy to get the fish you want to catch. And there's a lot of like learning in doing all these things, and that's my biggest piece of advice.
It's great. It's solid. Chris, this has been a pleasure. Where can we find you online?
Well, I think probably the best place is just to go to johnsonlaw.com. That's JOHNSEN law.com. And there's a scheduling widget. You can just click it. You could set a 15-minute call if you want to chat with me or bounce anything off of me. Happy to talk to anyone through that. You can see my bio, you go to LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Well, if you liked what you heard today, like, subscribe, and share. And Chris, thanks again for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.